Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk. Light Talk. Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk.
Hello and welcome to Light Talk. This is Stan and I'm broadcasting from my state-of-the-art studio in the swamps of Gainesville, Florida.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas.
And this is David, broadcasting from my summer hacienda, high up in the Rocky Mountains. And we are the Lumen Brothers. Hey.
You guessed it right. You guessed it right.
That's right.
That's us. Hey, I got some quick news just to let you guys know that I just spent the morning doing a sound check with sort of a kind of famous person that maybe people don't know who this famous person is in the lighting world, but Gordon Pearlman is going to be on the show with us, and his audio is going to be sweet because we checked that all out this morning, and he's going to tell us the story that's sort of a big deal in our business about how the first computer-controlled lighting was put together and organized for a little show that was quite successful called Chorus Line. And how he mentioned to me that actually it was his first job out of school. And we talked about how lucky is that your first job would be to be working with those people on that show at that time and to develop the lighting system for Chorus Line. And I mentioned to him this morning that I had seen the show from the booth because my friend was running it, and I watched him put the floppy disk in at intermission, and he said, you know what, on the original version, what we had, floppy disks, get this guys, had not been invented yet.
Whoa.
So
what did they use?
Yeah, so he's going to explain all of that to us on the show. Let's not give it all away, but I think it's sort of a great piece of lighting history, and we talked about how he's getting to put this story down for posterity, and I asked him to think beyond the technical issues, but also about some of the human stories and funny stories and touching stories about that experience. And he said, there's a whole bunch of them. So he also asked, how long is the show? So I said, don't worry, we'll cut out what's too much, and you'll have a chance to edit it. But it's exciting to have him on the show. We really are getting some amazing guests coming on Light Talk. And so Gordon Pearlman is coming up, everybody, on episode, I guess it will be 65, right, Steve?
Yes.
65. Cool. After Gordon, in 2 weeks, we'll be doing a live worldwide broadcast from the ETC workshop in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, that's right.
There'll be hundreds of thousands of people will be watching and listening to us.
Oh, that's a lot.
All over the world and live. I mean, so we can't screw this up, guys.
No, that's what's scary is it's live because we decided not to do this show live so we could take out the stupid stuff that we say.
That's right, which is a good thing because we say a lot of stupid stuff.
We do to get to the good stuff. We have to dig through the stupid to get to the good.
People think that we say stupid stuff. You should hear the stuff we cut out.
That's true.
Okay, so we have Sarah Clausen coming up. We have Fred
right.
Foster coming up. We'll be interviewing
the founder.
Fred. That's right. Ann Valentino is coming up. Obviously, Gordon Pearlman is coming up. And am I missing something?
Hey, and you know what? You're missing something because I'm going on vacation.
Don't tell him. Don't tell him. It's a surprise.
Okay, I'll just say this. I'm going on a second honeymoon. It's going to be great.
That's nice.
Who with?
Who with? Who with? Which wife is this, Stan?
With my wife.
That's wife number 7, right?
But we're going to have, for the first time ever on Light Talk, a guest host. Can't tell you who. That will be a surprise.
It's a surprise.
And I'm very pleased. I couldn't be more pleased as punch with who is going to take my place.
That's good. That's good. One thing, I have a lot of questions to ask Gordon.
I bet.
My chief question, and he could prepare for this, but why did they decide to use cassettes in the Performer and not floppies? I want to know about that.
Well, he told me one thing this morning. He said that when we're talking about the floppy disks, he did tell me that the original board, the recording of the data was done on paper tape.
Paper tape? What is that?
That's what he said. It's probably punch tape, I guess. We'll have to
Oh,
ask
this
him to
sounds like it'd be a fascinating interview. I really can't.
It will
And
be.
do you remember the name of that board?
the LS8.
Yep, very good.
LS8.
LS8.
Yeah, because you posted
That's
it.
right.
You posted
There's a
right?
picture of it on our Light Talk Facebook group page. Hey, it's time for question number 1. Juan in Mexico City asks, does anyone have a list of what the lighting positions in a theater are called? There seems to be a range of answers.
Like FOH or CO.
I have a whole list of them. And, there are positions that have several names depending on where you're at. The way people indicate names in their theater has a lot to do with the culture. I've worked at places where they actually indicate stage left and stage right by geographic locations, like the riverside and the city side. I think that was in Valencia. There are a lot of different names, and a lot of it, names are the preference of the theater. And I've always felt that you should find out what names the theater uses and use those names. And a good source would be the master electrician. Don't try to tell them what to name their theater. If they call their number one cove the number one bridge, or AP1, or the first, catwalk, then just use those names, just so that it helps them understand it. And it's also a really good thing to do because it shows that you care about conforming to the way they work. And that's really a good thing. So let's go over a few of them, okay? Front of house, beam, cove, AP. Do you know what AP stands for, guys?
Ante proscenium.
That's right, ante proscenium. Catwalk, truss, bridge. All those could mean the same position, usually the position in the ceiling, downstage of the proscenium. And also, the convention is that when you number those positions, you number from the proscenium out. So the closest AP or the catwalk would be number 1. The next furthest away be number 2, number 3, etc., that sort of thing. Let's talk about onstage, electrics, battens, bridges, LX. I have seen them named all these things. I personally like LX. I don't know why. I just usually say LX1, LX2, LX3. Again, going downstage.
I do know why. I was taught on that one why LX or versus electrics. I was taught by a Broadway stage manager. He said we did that, we shortened that, and we wanted syllables that wouldn't be confused by anything else on a headset. So they sort of chose those letters to make that sound unique, so it wouldn't sound like lights or electric and lights, or just so it could not be confused. They would call it electrics, sort of what
electrics. Yeah, but I never use. I used to use first electric segment, but now I use LX1, LX2, and everyone knows that if you have to add or insert a number, that you do like a 1A. If you have one between 1 and 2, it'd be like 1A, 1B. But again, a lot of this has to do with the theater, because if the theater has permanent electrics, you should use those names. Don't rename electrics that are permanent in the theater. If you need to insert electrics, you insert them. But that's, that's conforming to whatever the theater is. Also, bridges. Normally a bridge is an electric that you can walk on, but not necessarily. I have seen theaters that have used names bridges for electrics, just regular electrics. I have seen that. Front of house booms, you have the proscenium boom, you have the pit boom, you have the box boom, you have what also vertical coves, which also could be considered a box boom. Again, depends on the theater. And then your balcony rails, sometimes they're divided left, center, right, and from low to high, 1, 2, and 3. And then if you're working in a thrust or an arena, you throw it all out, and then you do a grid system. It's usually numbers on one side and letters on the other, or east numbers, west numbers, north south numbers, south numbers. I've seen that as well. Have you guys have anything to add to that?
Well, in dance, on your booms, some people call it a shin buster. I prefer to call it a kicker. And then that next light up at about the 5 or 6 foot level, some people call that a head high. I prefer to call it an escort.
An escort.
An escort.
And of course, you haven't talked about galleries, I don't think, on stage. Is it a pipe or is it a bar? Is it a scrim or a gauze? Is it a dim or a fade? Or even you walk into the theater. Are you seeing a ghost light? Or are you seeing an equity light?
Ah.
So there's a lot of different terminology.
That's great, Steve.
There is,
I love that.
It's a really great. As you guys have been talking, I'm in the mode, right? I'm in my theater consultant mode right now because we just got approved, and so and everybody's excited. It took a long time. It took probably 5 months for this contract to get approved in negotiations, and now it's a big rush to get the first meeting going, the kickoff meeting as they're called. But to the point about the positions, and we'll be doing that kind of work on this project. I was thinking about, I forget whose book it was. It might have been George Eisenhower's, where they talk about it's very difficult to build a theater if there isn't a community of people that work in it. And they give examples of theaters that were built without there being a theater company. The company itself, or the people who work in the building, this gets to David's and Steve's point, have a culture. And they're unique buildings. And there's an old kind of adage, you want to build a nuclear power plant, that's sort of relatively easy because there's a formula you can follow. Theaters are hard because they're specific to the people who use them. And so I think there is something to be said for listening, back to Steve's point from a couple of episodes ago, listening real carefully to what people say, the terms they use, the descriptions they use, and then adapting to those. So I think that's just one way, and that's just a way of operating, that they're all going to be unique. And there are some things that are worth standardizing and some things that are better not being standardized, perhaps.
I have a question about that, Stan, because as your job as a theater consultant and your clients are sort of not as experienced as you are technically, isn't it part of your job to educate them that, guys, maybe you want to name your electrics from downstage to upstage?
Yeah, we do more of that, I would say, with the client or the owners. We do more of that with the architect. The architect has never done a building like this before. The acoustician and I have done several buildings together and have lots of years of experience. The engineers may have done some auditoriums. That would be helpful. And the project managers and the interior designers probably have not done spaces like this before. So there will be some education necessary, but that's a delicate dance because these are all professionals. So nobody wants to insult anybody. Everybody wants to be respectful. Usually, I find the end users are pretty knowledgeable. So but in terms of offering what is typical in our profession, yes, it'll show on our drawings, and we oftentimes have to educate a construction manager who's never worked in a theater just what stage left, stage right, upstage, and downstage means, because but they might want to speak in east, north, west, south sides of a building, or how the building is set. So we adapt to their language to a certain degree, and that comes through experience. And they, if they're conscientious, adapt to our language.
We have a question from Todd in Nashville, and he writes, "What is your go-to truss company?" Well, heck, Todd, you're in Nashville. My go-to truss company is just down the road from you, which is James Thomas Engineering, which is now in Knoxville, Tennessee. Thomas began back in the UK in 1977. By the early 80s, they had moved a sales office out to Nevada. I began using that truss in 1983 and absolutely fell in love with the pre-rig truss. The company was so successful. They added a manufacturing plant in the United States in 1990, and now, as I say, they're based in Knoxville, Tennessee. They merged with another great truss company called Tomcat, and of course, Tomcat is also based in Knoxville, Tennessee. So those two companies, I think, are kind of the gold standard for trussing and rock and roll. Both of those companies got bought by the Milos Group. So Milos is based out of the UK. Their companies are Thomas, Tomcat, and Litec. A few years ago, Milos Group was bought by Area 4. Area 4 is a Czechoslovakian company, and they are the largest manufacturing plant of aluminium truss on the planet. And they have huge facilities in the UK, Germany, and the United States. They're primarily building out of Guangzhou, China. But these companies, a lot of really great companies, are merging into kind of a mega company. What do you guys use?
I was just going to ask you, Steve, first of all, I'm very impressed with your pronunciation of aluminium, which is actually British.
Yes,
I mean, where did that
too.
come from? You got a little Brit in you?
Aluminium.
Aluminium. No, that's how the Brits say it. It's great.
That would be hell no. My family came from Scotland.
There you
I
go.
am second generation, and
There
there's
you
not
go.
an ounce of British blood in me.
Are you Scottish,
The
Steve?
Scottish. Oh my God, you're Scottish.
I didn't know
There's
that.
a little Scot
Can you say that
there.
again, Steve? Say that again, that word.
Word.
Aluminium.
Aluminium.
Aluminium. Okay, I do have a serious follow-up question. Because trussing, when you specify trussing, that's part of rigging, is it not? So you must consult very closely with your production electrician and your technical director. Is that correct? Or not?
Nope.
Because you know all this stuff.
No, I think what happens is I lay out a system, and I'm aware of the size and scope of the tour. So let's take things like, I don't know, Beyonce and the Rolling Stones off the table and look at a kind of what's a normal tour today. I'm worried about budget. I'm worried primarily about truck pack, which is one of the reasons I went with Thomas Trussing. Before Thomas Trussing, I was using VTL trussing out of St. Louis, and that came in 18-foot sticks. Pretty revolutionary for its day. A lot of companies were using it. But then people discovered Thomas Engineering. And I think that first company that kind of recognized what Thomas could do in the early 80s was Bandit Lights out of Knoxville, Tennessee. And Thomas had a really interesting approach. All of their stuff was machine welded. It was aircraft grade aluminum. It was a cam lock system that put it together. And the real kind of genius behind it was their pre-rig truss could hold 12 par cans inside it and then deploy at a slight angle so you could get a really nice focus on stage. I think the hardest thing about the James Thomas truss in the early days was the dimensions of the truss. And I am told, and I don't know if this is true or not, I am told the dimensions of the truss were based on the cargo bay of a jet bringing things from the UK over the United States.
That's what
they
I heard.
built it so it would pack into the belly of an airplane. And that made it very, I could get, I don't know, a 2-truss system on the dance floor of a truck. So, it was very, between Thomas and Avo lights, that was kind of the gold standard in the early 80s for touring. And then, of course, Tomcat came along and made just a wide range of trussing. So the merger of those two companies, I think, is fantastic.
That's really interesting. I have one more follow-up question. You just pronounced aluminum. So
That's right. I was going to point out the same thing.
Is there a reason for this?
He is not consistent.
I wanted to do this for Stan. I didn't want to have to pronounce it again.
I think it would have confused
because it clearly was confused. I drink my beer out of an aluminium can. He drinks his out of a aluminum can.
Do you actually say that in Texas?
Thank you for that,
I like this.
That parallel also goes with beer, because when VTL was making their early truss was steel truss, so you had to have a steel beer can to drink out of.
Beer can.
Is there another way to pronounce steel?
They switched to aluminium at the last second, and it was too late. Thomas had eaten their lunch.
And drank their beers.
I'm going to say that from that one. I can't say that well. Aluminium.
You're almost there.
Right?
Well, we could try it.
Aluminium.
We'll sneak it into the Fred Foster interview somehow. You could say it there.
Somehow. How come they don't make their source 4s out of aluminium?
I'm bilingual.
Biopronunciation.
I think that's the name of the show right there. The Aluminium
That's the name of the show, Aluminium. Okay.
Aluminium. Well, I've got a question here from my old stomping grounds in Nebraska from Jill. And she writes, I heard a new term for the first time, quote, home run. What is that? Somehow I suspect she's not talking about baseball.
Not a grand slam?
She didn't say grand
Is this
slam.
an
She
inside
said
the park
run.
home run or outside the park home run?
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe she was using an aluminium bat.
Okay.
In baseball.
They do, they do use aluminium bats in baseball.
I know they do.
Colleges use aluminium bats. Okay.
They do.
Answer the question, Sam.
So, okay. Well, what I'm assuming that she means is when you're running some kind of a wire, usually it's control or audio, and the wire would go from the device you were trying to control back directly to the device that is sending the control signal. Thus, the term, or the slang really, home run. So if I have a fixture all the way on one side of the theater and I want to home run it back to the light board, it would be a direct connection from the light board putting out DMX, let's say, to that fixture, as opposed to what we might think of, and here's another term for you, Jill, daisy chaining. Or to daisy chain, meaning a pass-through, meaning it could be electricity. We used to have pass-throughs on strip lights back in the day, or DMX into the fixture, then DMX out of the fixture, going on to the next fixture and hop, skip, and jump from one device to the next. But a home run, you have nothing in between. So in a sense, it's simpler to troubleshoot. Whereas if you're daisy chaining, you may have many things in the path to get from the home location to the furthest out down the chain. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, I have nothing to add. That makes a lot of sense for a home run.
Well, then I would then have to say that you are listening to Light Talk with Steve, Stan, and David, the Lumen Brothers. And this week, Light Talk is sponsored by Double Troubleshooter from River City Tools. With all the advancements in theater technology, you need more than just a continuity tester to diagnose and solve those pesky bugs in your lighting rig. Computer light boards, LEDs, automated rigging, digital networking. Oi! Diagnosing today's problems seem to require an expert from NASA. How do you solve these problems without hiring the entire faculty from MIT? Get the new Double Troubleshooter tool from River City Tools. We don't believe in continuing education. We believe in psychic powers. The Double Troubleshooter can diagnose and solve the problem in seconds. Just turn it on and point it at the problem technology. And instantly, the screen reads out exactly what's wrong. Our new personality model features voice instructions using the voices of Stephen Hawking, Pee Wee Herman, Frank Sinatra, or even Siri. You can even record or sample any voice, including your mother's. Don't you love your mother telling you what to do? I know I do. So don't let those technological glitches ruin your latest production. Buy the River City Tools Double Troubleshooter today and enjoy the praise from your colleagues about how smart you really are.
Oh, we really need that. I mean, I'd love to point it at my TV sometimes.
I bet.
Hey, so we have a new For Your Consideration this week. And this actually came out from an episode we did, I think, last week or the week before. I forgot. But we were actually talking about LED and
dimmers, not dimmers.
And also the PARs, the LED PARs. Is that really a PAR?
Right.
And then we were talking about, how many times we see tungsten light sources used. And the question came up, should we teach obsolete technology?
Well, I had a conversation with a graduate student about this the other day who's actually not in lighting, but he does lighting, but he's really a scenic designer. And we were talking about platform construction in the hallway, whatever. And I raised the question with him. And he's probably, he's not the average graduate student. He's would be non-traditional, so he's older than most. And he said he thought that you should teach the history of it, that you wouldn't want to just not address it at all. And I was sort of saying, yeah, I can see how we wouldn't emphasize it because there's so much other stuff that needs to be covered, but to sort of understand, like I'm not a fan of teaching, I'm just changing subjects here, guys, a little bit. I'm not a fan of teaching hand drafting anymore. I think it's really gone by the way of the wayside. But in terms of lighting technology, I think it's maybe good to understand where it comes from, but I think the emphasis should probably be on what we're doing today.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I sort of introed that incorrectly because we do use tungsten filaments. What we don't use are things like saltwater dimmers, resistance boards, things like that. But, is there value in teaching that history? I always thought that there is value, but I wouldn't spend too much time because someone reminded me the other day that some people actually still use patch panels. I haven't used one in, 20 years, but there are some theaters out there that still use that. So it would be a good thing to at least mention to the students and tell them why they came into being.
Well, I guess if you walked into a booth and there was a patch panel and you had not even a clue as to what it was, you might even not be competent to plug your lights in.
Right. Exactly. So, and a lot of our students are going to be working in, in theaters that don't have the latest technology. So it would be a good thing to teach them. What do you think, Steve?
I'm going to vote no. I think the first question is a definition of what obsolete technology is. If it's obsolete for a reason. Don't waste your precious classroom time on it. Second, there are hundreds of books on theater lighting, design, and technology out there. If a student is really interested, walk up to the library, pull a book down, and take a look at it. And, I might give them a reading list to take a look at, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about, I don't know, an Olivet versus a Stoop.
Right.
So I think I think it's, I don't know. Take your cell phone out and look at it. Do you really need to know how a rotary phone works to understand and appreciate the cell phone? So I think that just takes up a lot of valuable time in the classroom.
I agree with Steve's point about time. I think I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. I agree. And there are great books on history. I just went through preparing a undergrad lighting 1 course, and I'm using Gillette's book, and I'm using and I just made an exam for every chapter, and it's the 6th edition, which is the latest, and the 7th is coming out in the fall, and I can see how they're catching up. But there are some things in there where I'm like, I'm not really going to talk about that very much. Like how much do we talk about a 2-scene preset and preset sheets? When's the last time you guys saw a theater with a 2-scene preset?
Actually, I have seen 2-scene presets in some of the garage theaters in L.A. They are still using 2-scene presets. I think presets are important personally. I don't think resistance dimmers are important.
No, I think that's a footnote.
Right.
I think the only value in a preset console is learning how to crossfade from bank 1 to bank 2. And I think what's valuable about that, and I do think what's really difficult to teach, is timing. Because a student sits down and looks at a console and says it's a 5-second cue, and they don't really understand what 5 seconds is. If I give them a 2-scene preset manual console and crossfade it, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4 complete, they go 1, 2, 3, 4 complete. So
can I say something about that? For 2 things. One thing that I do is as soon as before tech, I always sneak into the light board before the student gets there, and I go into the settings because they come from the factory with a default time of 5. And I change them to 0. So they have to think about what the time is. And then the other thing that Steve is bringing out, the way he's counting down the crossfade in a manual board. I remember when I was stage managing dance. I know, Steve, you've done a lot of dance. We might tell the operator that this is the time, but I would always, as stage manager, count the time so I could speed it up or slow it down because I was watching the action on stage. And it wasn't always, and their hand wasn't always doing the same 5 that we wanted or the same 3. So I would count it out so it would land where I wanted it to land. Sort of old school.
Well, 0 counts a little abrupt there for tech.
I would
when my students go in, I ask them to default to 3.1 seconds. And that way, or any 0.1, that way when they're looking at the full cue sheet, they go, I haven't really addressed Q7.
I haven't touched that one. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, doesn't the EOS default to 4.9?
No, 5.
But I don't know. Maybe that's just something the programmer set up. Maybe there's a default.
Probably the programmer set that up.
And he did that specifically for the reason you guys are talking about. So that it's not abrupt, and I know that that's a default. But I always put a time. It's just a habit. And it's something you have to
finish the cue, you say
record Q5 time 12.
Exactly. You always say time after you say the cue.
It is something that's part of the vernacular, and it forces them, like Stan was bringing up earlier, to think about time. You can't think about, I'll figure it out later. No, you should have figured it out in the rehearsal hall when you were watching.
Or have at least thought about it. Slow. Even if you wrote your notes slow, fast, medium,
Yeah, this is about a 7 count. This is about a 12 count.
The other thing that a manual console demonstrates really clearly, I think, we're talking about junior lighting designer third class, just kind of doing their first project. The thing I've always loved about a manual console is it's very easy to teach them what a lead lag cue is.
Yep.
And so they learn about split times that way also.
Yep.
Also, busking. It's easy. I mean, if you want to do simple busking, hey, there's nothing better than a bunch of faders there in your hands, you know?
Now, back to Light Talk.
We have a listener from Canada, and here she writes, I completed a 2-year technical theater diploma at a local college and have been working as a lighting technician since. I've been noticing in job postings that a bachelor's degree is becoming a standard for even entry-level positions. Is it worth going back to school to complete a degree, or is there any other advice to help me get ahead of the folks with degrees? Well, I'm going to reference you starting with episode 20 of Light Talk, and you can hear Steve Shelley talk about all the doors that got slammed in his face because he didn't have an MFA. He's a great designer, well known in the industry, has a award-winning book, and there's still doors that are closed to him because he doesn't have that MFA. And you only have an AA degree. So I don't think this is about what your skill level is. I think it's about, can you be hired by the type of people you want to work for? So absolutely, you've got 2 years under your belt. Go back and get that bachelor's degree and just, stop running into these doors that get closed in your face. And ultimately, if you think somewhere down the line you want to teach or be involved at a university, you're almost going to have an MFA. Education is just part of our industry these days. I remember back in the day, back when I was 12 years old, there was Barney, the guy down.
Barney. You talking about the cartoon character?
No.
Sorry.
There was Barney down the street with his garage and, slamming on a 2-seam preset board, rocking out and working down at the nightclubs. Those days are long gone. The people who are designers out there now really have some training under their belt. They have some education under their belt. The world has become more sophisticated. And I think, not having that degree is going to be something that's going to be a detriment to you for the rest of your life.
Everything Steve said is right, and here's an illustration. I had a friend who worked for Imagineering years ago. I think she listens to Light Talk, in fact, and her job was to sort of hire people for the lighting division. And she once gave me this really potent image. This is my desk. There's 2 stacks of resumes. One stack is really tall, and the other stack is somewhat tall. The taller stack are people without degrees, and the shorter stack are the people with degrees. Why would I even read the taller stack of the people without degrees? I might as well. And her rationale was, regardless of skills, it said to her, if you go to school, it means this simple thing. Simple, basic. You can start something and finish it. And you'd be surprised how rare that is in the world. So I think I think there's a sort of something about your character to be able to finish school and go through all the trials and tribulations that school is. Now, the second thing I want to say might sound a little bit elitist, but if you look at a diploma, there are these 2 little words on it. It says that this degree defers upon you all the, quote, rights and privileges, end quote, pertaining to. I don't know what that necessarily translates to.
Rights and privileges.
Okay, but it does say, if you look, my degree says it, your degrees say it. It says rights and privileges. And maybe that means you've done something that other people haven't done, and you've achieved that landmark. So I agree with everything Steve says, and I would just answer, it can't hurt you. It can only help you.
Well, there's one other thing I want to toss in there, because there's already people who are throwing beer cans at their computer right now.
Steel or aluminium?
Let them throw
glass bottles.
Glass bottles.
I occasionally meet someone, particularly when they're interviewing for school, and they say things like, well, I'm not really interested in the theater. I'm going to work in rock and roll. So why do I really need to go back to college? And let me give you just a cautionary tale here. Rock and roll is great if you can get in when you're 18 or 19. Maybe you get a tour when you're 20, 21. And some people make a really great living at it. Most people don't, because by the time they're 30 or 35, their knees have blown out, their back has blown out, and there's someone who is 18 or 19 or 20 who's willing to work for less money than you standing at the door. So all of a sudden, you have had a successful career, and now you're in your mid-30s, and do you really want to be on the road 40 weeks a year? That degree is something that can help you get a job in sales. It can help you get a job in manufacturing. It can help you get a job teaching. Yep. There's a lot of things a degree can do for you that simple, hard work and being in the trenches can't.
Absolutely. You could be just like one of the Lumen Brothers, or all the Lumen Brothers.
Ouch! I just got hit by a beer can.
You could be like us, right? And
it's made of aluminum.
Hey, guys, we have a bonus question, what they call lightning round question here. Tom from Nebraska asks, what is the Rem-Dim function and who came out with it first? Does anyone know the answer?
I only know the answer to the first part. I'm not sure about the second part.
Okay, what's the answer to the first part?
Well, that's a way where you can take a channel and bring it up and then click Rem-Dim and then everything else goes off. So you can see that channel solo, basically.
That's right. Rem-Dim is actually a great function. And now do you want the answer to the second part?
I could guess, but did somebody get a definitive answer? Because I know we've been researching this week.
Anything definitive in this life?
I think we can get a definitive answer from Sarah and Ann.
That's right.
In about a week.
Maybe. That's right.
Two of the best program designers on the planet.
Okay, so we'll hold off on the second part, but and you're going to have to wait a week to hear the answer to the second part. I have a pretty good idea.
Can I just say this? Tease it a little bit. So I know it was on the performers, the Kliegel performers, and I can picture it on the light palettes way in the day.
Do you know which came out first, the performer or the light palette?
I can picture the buttons. I can picture it in my mind's eye.
I can picture a button.
I've got buttons right in front of me right now. They're all over the place. One says P, one says G and H.
No, but not on a light palette. You're not.
I know the buttons on a light
you're
palette. I was bred on a light palette. I was raised on a light palette and a mini light palette. But anyway, we will ask the experts next week.
It's not next week.
Yes, it is. It's next week.
No,
it's in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Are you picturing that button?
No, it'll be in 3 weeks.
It
depends on when we run that.
Let's button up this show. Button down this show.
It's time to end the show.
Let's button up the show.
What buttons are we looking at? Okay, guys.
Button down.
You know, that Hammond organ solo right in the background tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Unless you've listening to us in the evening, then you spent another evening listening to Light Talk. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on any of your favorite podcast providers. And be sure to subscribe to Light Talk. That way you won't miss 1 second of crazy Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
In other words, stop and think.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Central City, Colorado, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we chat with Gordon Pearlman.
All that and a new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, everybody.